Last episode, we began work on another village for the Minecraft world with a snowy library and meeting area. We'll return to finish the second part of that village soon enough, but today we're spicing things up with something completely new for the display. At this point in the series, I have a pretty solid idea of what the future modules will be, but I still try to stay open to new suggestions. For over a year, you guys have been requesting the addition of Ravine, and you finally won me over. The more I thought about it, the more potential I could see, and it's a great way to blend the above and underground modules together. And with this ravine breaking through to the surface, we've also got the opportunity to make another highly requested module today, the Flower Forest. Plus, if that somehow wasn't enough, let's have a mineshaft cut through the ravine as well. Yes, this might be our most ambitious model to date, so hey, we had better get to building. Today's module is a bit irregularly shaped. It's basically a 1x2.5. That extra half, 8 studs or 4 blocks, will allow the ravine to go deeper into the display. It's not exactly a massive difference, but for this world it's always been the little things that set it apart. If you've seen any of my Nether videos, you know what's going on here. We want to cover the bottom of this ravine with lava. And if we're gonna have lava, we had better have it light up. So I'm employing the same technique here with fairy lights and lots of 1x1 round plates, or pips as I like to call them, to give the lava the glowing orange effect you would expect to see in game. I know there are plenty of lighting kits I could make use of here and they would be a lot easier to work with, but when you're working on a budget, cheap things like this $5 string of lights can work wonders. The wires are thin enough to fit between the pips, which is great, and it makes them really versatile. Plus, these LED bulbs are plenty bright for their size. Personally, I just think it's smartest to invest a majority of my budget for this series into the bricks, because at the end of the day, if the Lego doesn't look right, there's no amount of lights I can add to fix it. Like the other Nether modules, to make sure as much light comes through as possible, I'm putting the transparent orange pieces directly above the bulbs so that light can shine through. To some extent, it would shine through the opaque pieces too, but this of course is a much more striking and obvious effect. Call it a bit grim, but I just could not resist the urge to put a player slowly melting to death in the lava. Great stuff. I am going to turn off the lights for now, but we'll get them back on when we bring the whole build together. It's time to start working on the walls of the ravine. I have a feeling that this is going to eat through a lot of bricks, because even though the size of the module is relatively modest, there's a lot of surface area to cover. And I want to make sure a lot of that surface area too is covered in interesting things like the iron ore and the diamond ores I have placed here. And as I mentioned in the intro too, another way we're going to add visual interest to this ravine is have mineshaft bridges cross over it. Bridges, plural. For these, I'm going to be using the same exact design that I used in the dripstone cave mineshaft. It is going to be 4 blocks wide instead of 3 blocks wide. And the reason for that is just because it scales better to minifigures. If you've not seen this rail design done before, it's kind of become a cheesy studios classic. First showing up in the Mesa Badlands mineshaft, then in the dripstone cave, and once again here. It makes use of alternating 1x2 plates between rails to get that perfect Minecraft shape. On either side, we'll surround it with masonry bricks for the wood planks texture. One of these bridges we'll place just a couple of blocks above the lava surface. Hopefully it doesn't randomly burn down on us, but we'll put the other one higher up and closer to the front of the display, just to give the whole ravine a good sense of depth. It's kind of crazy how easy studs not on top construction has become thanks to pieces like this rather new 2x2 bracket. When installing these though, I did notice one little blunder on my part, and that's that I should probably change up the end of these bridges to be stone, as they only become wood when over air blocks. And honestly, it's only now that I'm reviewing this footage that I realized that that 2x2 has a furnace print on it. Well, I probably wasn't going to use that for anything else, so that's just kind of a funny little Easter egg for us now. Before Lego made the fancy double-sided furnace, one side lit, one side unlit, that's all we had, a 2x2 unlit furnace. Anyway, we'll squeeze those rails into place, and that's our first bridge done. I realize the 4 wide bridges might not be the perfect compromise, but when viewed from a distance and from the side, it's going to look pretty flawless. I was encouraged to see that most people agreed that this was the way to go when we tried this out in the dripstone caves. I'm going to keep building up the walls of this ravine, adding some diorite on the sides, some gold ore, the mineshaft scaffolding, lots of details to hopefully just make this a bit more interesting. As you can see too, the ends of these bridges extend beyond the boundaries of the module. Potentially we could put some lights in these openings in the future that could create a really cool effect. I'm gonna plop down some slimes here as well because they're awesome. And then I'll bring in my trusty amethyst geode module to see how much height we have to go. And it's a lot. This ravine is gonna be pretty cool once it breaks through to the surface. With sufficient additional height, we can now add the second bridge in. There's a lot to remember while recording these builds, and I hope you'll forgive me for retroactively adding in some ores here, like this gold ore here on the floor, or this coal ore here on the side. It does add a lot of detail and is definitely worth adding. The walls would just be so plain and gray otherwise. We're getting really close to finishing the underground portion of this module. There's just a few more bricks of height to add, and then on any other day, this is about where I would call this episode done. But today's special, we're going to be continuing with an entire separate above ground module for the flower forest. Both modules are so complicated and so dependent on each other, it just makes sense to do them at the same time. I like where this is headed so far, but I think that above ground portion is really going to tie this whole build together. I do think adding the mineshaft here was a good call. It allows us to get so many characters into this build that just otherwise couldn't have been here. We'll be adding more later on, don't you worry. Next up though, we have the most irregular foundation for a module that I've ever built before. I just love the idea of juxtaposing the serene beauty of a flower forest with this fiery abyss smack dab in the middle of it. It would appear I used all my 2x2 inverted brown jumpers on the snowy village, so I have to get a bit creative with my snot techniques to make sure no reddish brown anti-studs are showing for the dirt underneath. With that out of the way though, it is finally sweet, sweet tiling time. Now let's add some flowers to our forest. First up is going to be the rose bush. It's a pretty simple build making use of the modern flower stem piece with a variety of 1x1 flower plates on its branches. I want the flowers to look as different as possible from each other, so the dandelion is making use of the tri-leaf piece with the small friends flower on top of it. It just gives it a bit different shape. The azure bluet uses the slightly bulkier friends flower with the classic 4-petal 1x1 base. And then there's the orange tulip. You're probably happier not knowing how I made this one. Anyway, we're gonna fill in those remaining 2x2 jumpers with our classic grass stalk piece. And then the only thing we're going to need to add yet is some trees. It's kind of crazy that it took us this long to add some regular default oak trees, but we're finally here. So I'm gonna break these down in detail. Like everything else in the world, we don't want studs or anti-studs showing, so there's going to be a lot of studs not on top construction. I've made these 4 sub-assemblies, which are built off 4x6 plates. They're all slightly different in their configuration to give the tree a more natural look, and that's how they spawn in the game too. I've also added some of those 1x1 flower pieces in green to give the leaves some texture. There's no right or wrong way to do that. The more you use, the more parts it's going to take, and you could omit them all together and save yourself some cost, but I do like the look it gives. I've added additional snot bricks on the inside of the leaves to make sure this thing will not fall apart easily. The top layer is even more simple with 2 3-block sections and 2 1-block sections. These wouldn't necessarily need to have been built sideways like this, but it keeps the leaf texture consistent throughout the tree, which I think is a nice little detail. You could build this studs up though, because you don't have to worry about the anti-studs showing because they'll be covered by the bottom layer of leaves. And with that last 2x1 block section attached, we've completed our first tree. I'm going to repeat that process once more for an oak tree and then once more for a birch tree. We'll stagger these throughout the top part of the module to create a nice little forest. It already feels so cozy, and I love the colors from the flowers. Everything's really starting to come together now, and it's time to place the top half of this module onto the cave portion, the ravine itself. It's at this moment that the sheer scale of the module we've created today becomes apparent. This is a tall boy. There's only a few other things I want to add at this point, like a bat most recently featured in the training ground set, the blacksmith, an exclusive figure to the creeper mine, Hedwig, a Minecraft Dungeons figure from the Redstone battle set, a Moo Bloom from the first adventure, even if it isn't technically in the game, the Beekeeper from the Bee Farm set, and of course we've got to add some bees in here for our flower forest too. It wasn't all that long ago that I didn't even have plans to build a module like this. And now seeing it all come together, it's definitely one of my favorites in the display. There's something always pretty special about a good vertical Lego build, and the ravine and flower forest definitely brings that to the table here. It's got fun techniques, it's got color, it's got lots of fun mobs and characters. This one checks all the boxes for me, and I really hope that you like it too. Thanks to all of you who persisted and suggested the ravine. I'm glad I came around to it. Unfortunately, I can't add the whole thing to the larger display quite yet because we don't have enough underground modules to lift everything, but we can add the top portion and I can show you where it's going to go. It's going to be just a bit in front of the swamp between the ocean and the snowy village. A view from above shows that this right-hand side of the display definitely needs a lot of work. The good news is though that I have a lot of plans for what can go here, such as a player base and a mountain. Though before I can get to those, I really need to restock on my 2x dark bluish gray bricks, which this module completely depleted my supply of. So in the interim, we're going to be returning to the Nether to tackle one of the final biomes for that mini display, the Crimson Forest. This is going to be the largest Nether module in the entire Nether display. And in this 20-minute episode, we go into more detail than ever before on how I make these modules. If that sounds interesting to you, you can watch that episode as early as today by becoming a channel member. Not only will you get early access to that video and many others, you also support this series at the same time and ensure that I can continue to make awesome episodes like this. But that's all for this episode. Have a fantastic life, and I'll see you later.